Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. In today's video we're going to cover ball python lighting, and we're going to focus particularly closely on UVA and UVB and perhaps the reasons why we may have been told that they need UVB when they don't really need it quite as much as you might think. I know it's a bit of a controversial topic, it gets some people really angry, I see lots of arguments about it all the time, but really if we just reduce it down to the basic biochemistry behind how they synthesize and use vitamin D3, we will get to the base of whether they really need UVB lighting or not. So before we get too far into it, I just want to let you know that this is Blake. She's an albino clown female. She laid 4 eggs this year. It was her first clutch. So if any of you are interested, there are some of her babies which are just as bright and beautiful as her on my morph market below. But anyway, now we get to the topic which will get me angry comments, and that is ball python lighting. So before we look at anything in any detail whatsoever, I just want to talk very quickly about the relationship between ball pythons and light. People debate whether ball pythons are nocturnal or crepuscular. Well, some people think they're more crepuscular than anything else. Personally, I think they are nocturnal and sometimes crepuscular, so they will bask in the evenings sometimes. As for the reasons why they've been observed basking in the wild, I'm going to get to that later on in the video. But I just wanted to I know this is a difficult topic to cover in one video, but I do want to get quickly to the the morphological, the anatomical rather, adaptations that ball pythons have for being nocturnal, and why I believe so strongly that they are predominantly nocturnal. So the first thing we see is the infrared labial pits, those holes in Blake's face along the labial scales. Those are a similar mechanism to the labial pits that we see in crotalids like pit vipers, so rattlesnakes, etc., cottonmouths, water moccasins, and essentially they are something that has evolved over millions and millions and millions of years to be able to see the body heat of their prey items at night. So they're a thin membrane stretched across a recess, a pit in the labial scale. It's a thin, probably highly vascularized membrane with what is basically similar to mechanoreceptors. So these are these cells in your skin that feel heat, etc. There's a nerve linked to each grouping of neuron in these receptors, and this nerve travels up to the brain, and I don't want to make it too complicated. Even for me, I don't want to make it too complicated, but basically it's almost as if they feel heat. They feel the radiation of body heat from their prey items coming to them. And that is an extremely advanced, what you would call a derived characteristic, which shows, a long evolutionary history of hunting at night or in low light situations. In addition to this, there's also the fact that ball pythons have a slit pupil, which you can't see very well on Blake because she's albino, but they have what we call an elliptical pupil, which is a slit pupil. It makes it easier to open the pupil very wide at night and let in a lot more light, because that is the pupil's main role, is taking in light. So that is really, two characteristics that are very strong indicators of a nocturnal animal, and often you see even elliptical pupils in colubrid snakes, like the cat-eyed snakes, which are well named, but even in crepuscular colubrids, like say the false smooth snake in southern Europe, which is now considered to be mainly crepuscular, we see a round pupil. So there is really good, strong evidence, just based on their anatomy and their evolutionary history, that the ball pythons are nocturnal. And also I'd say they're mostly nocturnal because I've lived in the same room with them for the last 20 odd years, so I know when they're moving around at night and waking me up and falling off stuff and knocking things over, basically. So that's pretty simple to cover, really. But what we're seeing now in recent times is a lot of people who give us their information on keeping reptiles are bloggers and YouTubers, and there is this constant effort to bend the science, bend the facts around the natural history of species of commonly kept reptiles. The main target is usually ball pythons because there's so many of them in captivity, and this niche is massively profitable. There is much more money in selling products to do with royal pythons, ball pythons I should call them, than there is in selling the actual snakes themselves. So this is a niche that is making hundreds of millions of dollars every year by marketing products, and one of the products that has come up recently is UVB lighting and UVA lighting, but full spectrum lighting. And so there is this kind of following the money, this trend to bend their natural history and coerce you, the pet keepers, into believing that they need full spectrum lighting, and essentially making you feel guilty if you don't provide it. Now, me, I don't really like that, because my model for monetizing this channel will be through Patreon, through memberships, and through linking it back to a website, which hopefully eventually will do well and get ad revenue coming from several angles, if you will. I don't like the idea of trying to sell you products that you don't need. I'm happy to sell you things you do need, but I don't want to sell you things you don't need, because it's a question of integrity, and I don't really like it. So with that, now we've covered the basics of why they're nocturnal and why people are going to try and tell you they're not nocturnal. Let's cover the basics of vitamin D, because vitamin D3 is the main reason people are going to tell you your ball python needs UVB or full spectrum lighting. Now, vitamin D in vertebrates, all vertebrates as far as I know, is the vitamin which is a hormonal, well, a steroidal vitamin, I guess you'd call it. It's essentially a hormone. It regulates how well you can absorb calcium and phosphorus and use them for your skeleton, probably some metabolic functions and immunity and other stuff I can't remember as well. But basically, if your reptiles don't get enough vitamin D3, they'll essentially get rickets or hypovitaminosis D, which is just, not being able to take in enough calcium. They get bendy bones, bendy jaw, soft shell in tortoises, snakes. I'm not really sure what it does in snakes, but basically it kills them. It kills them. And this is why people say, for your pets to have enough vitamin D3, they need UVA lighting and UVB lighting for full spectrum to work. So, yeah, that sounds good, but it's not actually true. So vitamin D is not just found in sunlight. That is the main source of it, particularly for mammals like humans. We get most of our vitamin D3 from sunlight, but it isn't the only source. There's several pathways to get vitamin D3. So when UVA and UVB radiation hits your skin, there's something present under your skin in the fatty material, I guess. Doesn't sound very flattering, that's what it is, called 7-dehydrocholesterol. Is it? Yeah, 7-dehydrocholesterol. And that is essentially provitamin D3. When this radiation heats it and activates it, your body will change it into cholecalciferol, which is vitamin D3. Likewise, when you eat things like meat, eggs, dairy, I can't remember if it's in it naturally or if it's added, but essentially meats, and especially things like liver, you get vitamin D2 and D3. D3 is the one we want to focus on, because we know, reptiles and mammals and fish are much better at taking in vitamin D3 and using it than they are vitamin D2. So we're just going to discard D2 for now, but we're going to understand that you can get vitamin D3 from your diet or from sunlight. And animals like snakes, which eat whole prey, and some of which are nocturnal, particularly the nocturnal ones, are good at absorbing it from their diet. So what happens when they get this D3 either from sunlight or from diet is it goes to their liver. The liver changes it into calcidiol, which is the form you will find present in a blood test, for example. Calcidiol is not particularly biologically active, so they can't really use it. But after this step, the calcidiol goes to the kidneys, which transform it into calcitriol. Some of it they transform into calcitriol, and then they can use it. The rest they transform into calcitroic acid, which is excreted and discarded if there's too much calcidiol. So the calcitriol is then, circulated into your bloodstream, and when it gets to the intestines and parts of your body like that in the digestive system, it is the calcitriol that actually allows you to absorb calcium and phosphorus and use it properly. So that is, how we get vitamin D3. Humans, reptiles, whatever. So what happens when a ball python eats a rat. Okay, and when I say rat, I mean rat that's been raised by a good producer who's fed it a balanced diet that will include vitamin D3. Okay, not from the big chain supermarkets where, the rat might even have salmonella as well. I'm talking about from a good producer, that you trust and you can contact and talk to about what they feed their rats. If your ball python eats a healthy rat like this every week, it gets the vitamin D3 circulating in the rat's bloodstream at the time of death. It gets the calcidiol that is in the rat's liver at the time of death, and it gets the calcitriol that is in the rat's kidneys and to an extent in the digestive system. It gets all three forms of vitamin D3, and it gets two of those forms in a more usable state where there's already been a step skipped. So to say that your snake that eats a healthy rat every week or every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever age, is not getting enough vitamin D3, and to say that you need to also give it UVA and UVB lighting is extremely, what's the word? I'd say that's extremely difficult to substantiate and to prove. It doesn't really make sense. Just to anyone with any kind of, small background in biochemistry. Me, I've only got a couple diplomas, but if you asked someone who's done dentistry, pharmacy, someone who's a doctor or medical student, anything like that, anyone with a bit of biochemistry behind them, they'd say, it's really hard to make sense of this, especially when there's an animal that has adapted to getting most of its vitamin D3, probably from whole prey, and is mostly nocturnal. So all that to say that, if your snake's eating healthy rats, it doesn't need UVA and UVB light if it's nocturnal or mainly nocturnal like a ball python, or even if it eats whole prey. It really does. It does seem a little bit disingenuous to say so, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, what people will counter me with is they'll say, but there's studies that prove if you use UVB lighting for snakes, there's been studies that have shown that it increased the calcidiol in their blood serum. And I would say, yeah, there was one study I remember that did prove that. There was another study that proved that the levels stayed about the same. But the study that did prove it, it didn't prove that extra calcidiol in the bloodstream went on to be used after being converted to calcitriol. We don't know how much of it was actually converted to calcitroic acid and then excreted because it wasn't needed. We don't know what the baseline was. Did that snake actually need that extra calcidiol, that form of vitamin D3? Or was the snake fine before? I think that's kind of a big question. And, it's important to remember that there's also the case of you can give too many vitamins to snakes. You can give them too much through supplementation or whatever. I'm not saying that giving UVB lighting to your ball python would give it too much vitamin D3. I'm just saying there's no proof that it's going to use that extra vitamin D3, and their natural history would suggest that they have enough just from eating whole prey. That's what they do. Another study that also people throw at me a lot is, well, you know what, ball pythons can see UV light, and this is true, by the way. This is absolutely proven. The structure of their eyes, I can't remember if it's the rod or the cone cells, because I always confuse them, but the structure of their eyes does prove that they can see UV light. And people say to me, well, why would they see UV light if they don't go out in sunlight, if they don't bask? And actually sometimes they do bask, which I'll get to in a minute, but more importantly, if you're a nocturnal animal, it's still pretty important to see sunlight, because if you couldn't see sunlight, how would you know when it was dark? There's, every argument goes both ways. If I was nocturnal, I was scared to go out during the day, I would want to be able to recognize daylight. There's also, it's just funny the way these studies get used, because there was a similar study on the elephant hawk moth, which is a beautiful moth we get here in Europe, that also proved that elephant hawk moths can see UV light. And the thing is, elephant hawk moths are also nocturnal. They're completely nocturnal. You only ever find them flying at night unless they're, kind of dying. But no one's debating it. Everyone said, oh, okay. And the only difference between the two species is that ball pythons make people hundreds of thousands of dollars in, affiliate links and whatnot, selling lighting and other accessories for them, whereas no one keeps elephant hawk moths as pets. They don't make any money. and for them it was accepted, but for ball pythons it's not accepted. So you see, when you look at these things from just a logical, financial viewpoint, they don't always make a lot of sense. So on the question of basking though, I do want to cover this. Ball pythons do bask. It's been observed many times. But when they bask is when it's a female, usually a gravid female, but it can be a female that is kind of incubating her eggs. I say incubating because they're not good at raising their own body temperature. But it can be a female that's looking after her eggs, and she realizes that she's getting too cool. She'll go out, bask for half an hour, warm her body temperature up, and go back and transfer that heat to the eggs. Because these snakes can't raise their body temperature to incubate their eggs like big pythons, like Burmese pythons can. And this has been reproduced in captivity lots of times, and it's pretty much a pretty certain thing. So they do bask, but they probably don't bask for UVA and UVB radiation. And also, when it comes to UVA for ball pythons, it is also worth remembering that when they are seen in daylight, in brackets, because as I said, they can sometimes be a bit crepuscular as well. It's right at the end of the day when the sunlight isn't very strong, it's not very warm. The radiation they're getting from it won't be nearly as intense as it would be at midday. And it's also important to remember that a normal ball python, not one like Blake, but a normal one, is mostly black and brown. And there is an intense, concentration of melanin in their scales and skin under the scales. And this really does stop a lot of UVA and UVB getting through the skin and being used. So, if you look at most diurnal reptiles that bask a lot of them are actually green, like the rough green snake, or the iguana, for example. Even beardies tend to go a lighter color when they're warm. So none of it makes sense, none of it tracks. So where does this leave me on the subject of UVA and UVB lighting for ball pythons? Because I've just spoken as if I'm against it, and I'm not actually against it at all. I say, if you think it can do anything for their health, or you think it's a good idea, and you want to provide UVB lighting, full spectrum lighting, be it combined with halogen or whatever else, for your ball pythons, go ahead and do it. You're the owner, it's your judgment. It's not going to harm them in any way. I really don't think it harms them, so long as they have lots of places to hide, they have lots of clutter, and they can completely get out of the light. That is the main thing to ball pythons, that if they want to be in complete darkness during the day, then they can do so. The rest of the time, the lighting is going to make any plants you have in the enclosure grow, and it's going to make the enclosure look a lot nicer. So, give them lighting if you wish, but for me, I would say, keep in mind that the lighting is very much for us, it's probably not for them. Again, you don't have to listen to anyone's opinion on this, because you're the owner, and as long as your ball python is feeding and healthy and happy, that's the main thing. So if it feeds without UV, great. If it feeds with UV, great. All I'm trying to tell you is that sometimes when people try and sell us products, I'm not entirely convinced by the reasoning, and I'm not always convinced by the way scientific studies are thrown around. Sometimes I think they're misused. Sometimes I think people think that anyone with a BSc can be a fully fledged scientist and understand a whole subject from a couple of short observational studies, and in my experience that isn't the case. Otherwise, I consider myself a fully fledged scientist, and I've got a few diplomas lying around collecting dust, and I really don't think that. I still learn stuff on a regular basis. So I'm just not convinced by people throwing out all these references to studies here, there and everywhere, and then saying, by the way, buy this. It just doesn't work for me. So anyway, I hope this has been an interesting video for you. If you agree or disagree, please do comment and let me know. I'd be interested to hear what anyone thinks. But as always, please do like, subscribe, and let me know anything else you'd like to hear about on the channel. Any ideas, I'm happy to try to cover them at some point. Thank you very much.